Hello, I'm Nick. I am living in DC currently. Just as a reference for how much I've played this game, I've played it 5 times with other players, and then I played it about a dozen times by myself playing all 4 seats. But one of the things that we learned fairly early on is don't be in the lead. Then my partner, when I left, that's what she said to me. She said, make sure you're not in first place. And in both games, I was in second place for the majority of the game until I came to first place at the end of the game. So I think that is actually pretty good advice. That's not uncommon advice, I think, for games that tend to be more aggressive. Dominant Species Marine doesn't have a ton of attacking options or mitigating options, but it's got enough. And I think it has enough to really take one person down a significant peg. And so if you're the person who's the obvious target, you often end up suffering those consequences. And the people who are in, second or third then have the opportunity to catch up to you. So that's kind of more on the social engineering side of it rather than actual strategy in the game. I think probably the most significant thing that people make as a mistake when they play this game is they're really focused on developing their board position. They're really focused on eating lots of food, no one ever dies, try to kind of spread out, which are all good things to do. But what's more important than anything else is scoring points. You just need to score points in this game. And there's a handful of avenues for doing that. But I think people just sort of end up forgetting or not prioritizing point scoring as much as they necessarily should, especially the evolution actions. The action where you score a location on the board and then you take a card based on which thing you scored is absolutely core to what it is that you're doing, because it scores points. And those cards are really powerful. They're basically as good as taking action in and of themselves. And so really competing for those domination or evolution spaces at the bottom is totally crux to strategies. Those are a couple things that I really keep in mind every time I'm playing. Great question. I mean, I think one of the things about this game is that it is very tactical. It's hard to go in and say hey, you should play this specific way. You need to pay attention to what domination cards are in play at any given time. When something flips up, those 5 cards on the side of the board, I see a lot of people, they go to score and then they look at them and they're like, oh, this one, I guess I'll take this one. You should know what all 5 of those are. As soon as a new one flips up, read it, think about it for a couple of reasons. One is something might be absolutely gangbusters for you, and you then need to change your game plan to make sure that you're getting that card. Or worst case scenario, someone has something that can blow you out of the water, and you want to make sure that you are not. There's a couple cards in this game that can just completely handicap your game plan, and you need to be you can play around those things, but you need to be aware that those options are in play. And so paying attention to when those really heavy hitting cards show up and what can happen and who can take the actions that might allow them to do that, I think is the most fundamental strategy you can employ. Trophic Cascades came up in almost, has come up in so many of my games and completely changed the contour of the game. That is, whatever slot this card is in, remove that much food from the board around one space. And usually someone chooses the center space and just completely starves other players out of the game. I, in the finals, accidentally put myself in a position where if we drew an extinction card off the top of the deck, I was dead. And I don't mean like I would have been in a tough position and had to crawl back. I mean like would have lost the game on the spot. No more plays for me, essentially. And that was a mistake on my part, and I ended up not getting unlucky because the odds were in my favor. If I had gotten unlucky there, I would have been completely toast. Shouldn't have put myself in that position. Thankfully, things worked out in that instant. So Trophic Cascades is just terrifying. Profligate Carnivores is another card that comes out that if someone takes it, it's again another card that triggers in the X spot. If someone takes it in the 4th or 5th spot, they can just suddenly be everywhere they want to be and kill, you or your opponents in places where they want to be. So those are cards that are really important to pay attention to. There's 2 cards that grow your species population, one of which I used in the finals. One basically puts a cube into play for every cube on a location. I think it's called Population Explosion. And then another one, I don't remember what it's called, you put a cube everywhere you already have a cube. And those 2 can, depending on your setup of the board, suddenly just empty out your gene pool. And then you don't have to worry about speciating, which saves you essentially like 4, 5, 6 actions over the course of the game. It's really powerful. You're trying to get your cubes out into play before the end of the game because that end game scoring is so huge. I would say about in a lot of games, about 2/3 of your scoring is going to take place in the course of the game, and about 1/3 of your scoring is going to take place at the end of the game. And you can completely upset other players based on how you've spread out on the board. But the bottom action of the board, and the one that lets you take the special action tokens, you can do some really tricky stuff with those where, if you have 10 locations on board and you pick up a 1/3 food of your starting type, that could be worth 30 points at the end of the game. And like a winning score in this game is somewhere between, it depends vastly on how long the game is, but like I think 150 is like a pretty good benchmark that you can set yourself on. And if you're scoring 30 points off of just sort of the one special action token, that's a huge leap. So thinking about like what your end game scoring is going to look like, in addition to just making sure that you're scoring points throughout the course of the game, is going to make a big difference there. Of the players in the finals, I'd say there's sort of like 4 main things that people use to score points. I had my fingers on a lot of things. I put a lot of my cubes into play early, and so I was doing a lot of the domination scoring throughout the course of the game, and then had a lot of endgame scoring on the board. Another player really focused on survival and then hit a couple runners, which was totally essential for them to catch up because they were behind. So they realized they were behind and they just pumped that survival strategy and got lucky for it, which was like great. It's great that they noticed that that's what they needed to do. One player really focused on having their special action pawns be points. And then the 4th player, who was the player that was leading all game long until the last like 2 rounds, every single action he took, he just scored points. He would take migrations to score points. He would take domination to score points. He would take tectonics to score points. He didn't actually really care what the structure of the board was. He just made points all game long. And it almost worked out for him. Didn't quite, but it nearly got there.